The snow came down in angry spirals, tearing sideways across the canyon like the land itself was trying to erase its edges. Silas McKenna pulled his coat tighter, the wind biting through even the thickest wool. His horse trudged forward one stubborn step at a time, hooves crunching through drifts that reached the stirrups. The world had gone white and dead, except for the breath that rose in clouds from his mouth, and the thing lying motionless beside the trail. At first he thought it was a bundle of hides blown loose from a trader's pack, but something about the stillness was too perfect, too deliberate. He drew up the reins. The horse snorted uneasy. Silas slid down, his boots sinking deep into the snow. The figure was curled tightly against a boulder, almost part of it, small, fragile, too thin for this kind of storm. It wasn't a bundle. It was a girl. Apache, by the look of her dress and long black hair tangled with ice. Maybe 19, maybe younger. Her lips were blue. Her skin was too pale. She wasn't shivering anymore. That was the part that scared him. Silas dropped to his knees beside her. Her eyes cracked open, dark and alert despite the frost clinging to her lashes. They didn't plead or panic, they just looked at him. And something inside him cracked, not from pity, but from memory. He'd seen that same look once before, on his wife's face the night she died of fever. On his son's, too, 2 days later. They hadn't begged either. They'd just faded, because he hadn't reached them in time. But this time, this girl, he was here. Without a word, he unstrapped his bedroll and pulled free the only thing in it that mattered, a blue and gray wool blanket, frayed at the corners but warm as anything west of the Mississippi. His grandmother had woven it before the smallpox took her in '58. It was the last thing that had touched his family before the world fell apart. He draped it over the girl's shoulders and tucked it around her, firm but gentle. She blinked at him slowly, like she didn't quite believe it. Her fingers, stiff and raw, reached up and clutched the wool like it was the only real thing left. "You'll be all right," he murmured, though he had no idea if she understood. Still kneeling, he glanced up at the sky. The storm was building harder, blowing sideways now. They wouldn't survive long exposed like this. He stood and motioned her toward the rocks behind them, a small alcove in the cliff face, just enough shelter to break the wind. She moved with effort, each step a battle. He guided her, supported her weight with one hand while leading the horse with the other. Once under the overhang, he built a quick fire, small but hot. He handed her a strip of dried meat. She chewed slowly, never looking away from him. Finally, she pointed at herself and said, "Nayeli." Her voice was quiet, shaped strangely by accent and cold, but clear. He nodded. "Silas." She repeated it softly, as if memorizing it. "See, lass." For a long time, they sat in silence. Just firelight, the crackle of snow melting off her dress, and the wind howling just beyond the rocks. Silas found himself watching her more than he meant to. She was young, yes, but there was steel in her eyes. Not fear, resignation. That was worse. How long had she been out there? Who had left her behind? And why had no one come looking? He pushed the questions aside. He wasn't here for answers. He was just trying to keep her breathing until morning. When the wind began to shift, he added a final log to the fire and settled back against the rock wall. His bones ached, his stomach grumbled, but for the first time in a long while, he didn't feel alone. As his eyes began to close, Nayeli adjusted the blanket over her shoulders and looked at him one last time before sleep. Her lips moved in a whisper of Apache he didn't understand. And far above them, through a brief break in the clouds, the stars blinked cold and sharp, like watchful eyes. Morning came quiet and silver, The storm had passed some time before dawn, leaving behind a crust of ice that cracked underfoot. Silas stirred first. He poked at the fire with a charred stick, watching the last coals glow and fade like dying embers of a dream. Nayeli was still asleep, curled beneath his blanket. Her breathing was steady now. Color had returned to her cheeks. She looked almost peaceful, like she belonged here, in this canyon carved by time and wind. Silas stood slowly, muscles aching from the night against cold stone. He fed the horse, packed his few supplies, and took one last look around. Just sky, snow, and rock. No movement on the horizon. When he turned back, Nayeli was awake. She sat cross-legged, clutching the blanket around her shoulders. Their eyes met again, hers filled with quiet awareness, his shadowed by the weight of what came next. She reached up, fingers brushing the edge of the blanket. Then, with great care, she folded it into a tight square and held it out to him. Silas hesitated. He stared at the wool bundle in her hands, then shook his head. "Keep it. You'll need it more than I will." Her eyes widened, not with gratitude this time, but with something else. Confusion, worry. She spoke quickly in Apache, her words clipped and urgent. Her hands gestured between the blanket, her chest, and him. Silas held up his palms. "I don't understand." She repeated herself, slower, as if sheer repetition could breach the wall of language. Then finally stopped. Her shoulders slumped. But her gaze never wavered. "Stay warm," Silas said softly, tipping his hat. Then he mounted up and turned his horse toward the narrow trail back to civilization. As he rode away, he didn't look back. But Nayeli did. She stood there long after he'd vanished into the mist, the blanket hugged tightly to her chest. The smoke from their fire spiraled up into the morning air like a prayer. And somewhere beyond the trees, far off and faint, the drums began to beat. The trading post sat in a shallow basin flanked by towering pine and wind-scarred granite. It was little more than a log cabin with a porch, a smokehouse, and a half-frozen well out back. But after 3 days in the snow, it felt like a palace. Silas arrived by mid-afternoon. The horses stabled out front whickered as he passed. Inside, the heat hit him like a punch, so sudden it stung. 3 men played cards near the pot-bellied stove. One looked up and grinned through yellow teeth. "Well, I'll be. Silas McKenna. Didn't expect you till spring." Silas nodded toward the man behind the counter. "Murphy, storm nearly buried me halfway up Cloud Pass." Murphy poured him a steaming tin cup. The smell of bitter coffee cut through the scent of old smoke and wet leather. "See anything out there?" one of the card players asked, a narrow man with a puckered scar running down his jaw. "Apache been spotted north of the river. Folks are nervous." Silas froze halfway to sipping. His mind went back to the firelight, to the girl wrapped in wool, to the way her eyes had widened when he left the blanket behind. He cleared his throat. "Didn't see much." "You're lucky," the man muttered. "Last week a wagon train got hit south of here, stripped bare, bodies left for buzzards." Another man spat into the brass spittoon. "Animals." Silas's jaw tightened. That word, animals, echoed hard against what he'd seen. Nayeli wasn't an animal. She was a girl freezing to death, a human being. He drained the coffee and stood. "I'll take the back room tonight." Murphy nodded, but his eyes were uneasy. "I would too. You hear that?" The card game paused. Outside, beyond the thick log walls, came a sound, low and rhythmic. A drumbeat. Distant, steady. "It's been going on since sun up," Murphy said. "You ask me, they're signaling. And whoever they're talking to, it ain't us." Silas's heart thumped slower and heavier. He remembered Nayeli's final gesture, her urgent tone, the way she'd looked at him. Like she was trying to tell him something, something he hadn't understood, something he should have. Outside, the drums got louder. Before we dive into everything, let us know in the comments, where are you watching this video from? Connecting with viewers from all across the world has been a huge source of inspiration for us. Silas McKenna woke before dawn, already dressed, already alert. Old habits from older wars never died. The fire in the trading post stove had gone out during the night, leaving only a faint warmth that barely touched the bones. He poured himself a cup of leftover coffee and stared at the window. The world outside was pale gray, hushed beneath a crust of snow and silence. Then he heard it. Thump. Low. Measured. Not wind, not wood. A drum. Silas set the tin cup down slowly. The sound came again, this time joined by another, slightly off rhythm. Then another, like distant heartbeats echoing through the mountains. He stepped onto the porch, boots crunching frost. The air was sharp, clean, and wrong. The sound wasn't just coming from one direction. It was surrounding the valley, a perimeter, not a path. Murphy stood nearby, rifle already in hand, eyes scanning the tree line. "They were at it all night," the old trader muttered. "Can't see a damn thing, but I can feel 'em watching, like ghosts behind the pines." Silas stayed quiet. He didn't need confirmation. He could feel it too. The same sensation he'd once felt on patrol in Tennessee, when rebels lay silent in the trees, waiting for a Union column to pass. "They ain't raidin'," Murphy said. "Not yet. But something's comin'. You bring anything back with you from that trail?" Silas didn't answer. He tightened his saddle straps instead. "You're leavin'?" Murphy asked. Silas nodded. "Better I leave before whatever they want shows up. Maybe I'm the reason they're circlin'." Murphy didn't try to stop him. He just looked grim. "If it's you they're after, riding out ain't gonna save you. They already know where you'll go." Silas mounted up and rode slow, hands visible, no rifle drawn. Every hoofbeat echoed too loud in the silence. He made it a mile before the mist began to move. Not wind, not snow. Figures. 7 of them. They didn't charge. They didn't speak. They stepped out from the trees like shadows forming flesh. Each man sat on a painted horse, faces marked with charcoal and clay, eyes calm, still. Warriors. Apache. Silas halted. His horse shifted nervously under him. He raised both hands, palms outward. Then one figure rode forward. She wore a deerskin dress dusted with frost, her dark hair braided with sinew and feather. But what caught Silas's breath was what she wore over her shoulders. The blanket. His blanket. Nayeli. She met his gaze with something unreadable, neither accusation nor welcome, just inevitability. Another horse stepped aside to reveal a man older than the rest. His face was carved like canyon stone, every wrinkle telling a different story. He wore a bone necklace and a robe of buffalo hide. In one hand, he held a staff etched with symbols. He lifted it, and everyone stopped breathing. Then he spoke, in Apache. The words rolled like thunder across dry earth, deep, commanding. Nayeli translated slowly, her English careful. "This is my grandfather. His name is Thornhawk. He says, 'You must come.'" Silas shifted in the saddle. "Come where?" "To the place where a promise was made, even if you didn't know you made it." Silas's stomach knotted. "I didn't promise anything," he said quietly. "I gave you a blanket, that's all." Nayeli's eyes softened, but her voice remained firm. "In our ways, that means everything." He looked around, at the warriors flanking the trail. at the pine trees behind him, too far to ride to, at the snow beginning to fall again. He wasn't trapped, but he wasn't free either. Silas sighed, then nodded once. "All right," he said. "Let's go find out what I did." The trail back into the canyon was narrower than Silas remembered. Snowmelt turned the path to sludge, and pine needles clung to the legs of his horse like static. The Apache riders formed a silent procession around him. No one spoke, not even Nayeli. She rode beside her grandfather, the blanket still draped over her shoulders. Its blue and gray threads looked strange against the traditional earth tones of the tribe. Out of place, like Silas. They reached a ridge and paused. Below them, nestled between cliffs, lay a village, hidden so well it might have been imagined. Smoke curled from chimney holes. Children ran across packed snow, laughter distant but sharp. Nayeli turned to him. "You are not their first white man, but you are the first one they didn't tie up." Silas didn't respond. As they descended, villagers emerged from doorways and tents. Men narrowed their eyes, women held their children close. Children stared. The tension hung like thick frost, unmoving. He was led through a cluster of dwellings into the center, a fire pit surrounded by logs and smooth stones. There the elders waited. Old men and older women, faces carved by years and wind. Thornhawk took his place at the circle's head. Nayeli stepped forward. She said something in Apache, clear, strong, and final. The silence that followed was thunderous. One elder grunted, another nodded. But a third, an older woman with silver hair braided with turquoise, spoke sharply. Her voice was sharp enough to cut pine. Nayeli winced, then turned to Silas. "She says, I have shamed the family, that I brought danger to our door by accepting your blanket." Silas frowned. "Accepting my what?" Nayeli hesitated, then stepped toward him, placing her hand lightly over her chest. "You gave me a blanket when I was dying. You kept it with me through the night. You refused to take it back. That means you made a vow." Silas blanked. "I gave you a blanket so you wouldn't freeze to death." "In our ways," she said, voice gentler now, "that's what a man does for his wife." A log cracked in the fire. The sound made him flinch. "Hold on," Silas said, "that wasn't my intent." "Intent matters less than action," Nayeli replied, echoing the phrase he'd heard her grandfather say earlier. The silver-haired elder spoke again, harsher this time. Another man, the one with the hawk tattoo on his cheek, stood and paced. His arms crossed, his glare pierced. "Who is he?" Silas asked. Nayeli lowered her voice. "Kosati, a warrior of the Bear Lodge, my former suitor." Ah, that explained the look in the man's eyes, and the fact that his fingers kept drifting toward the knife at his belt. Kosati addressed the elders in a firestorm of syllables, pointing to Silas, then to Nayeli, then to the blanket. Others in the circle murmured in response. The mood was shifting, hardening. Finally, Thornhawk lifted his hand. The noise stopped. Nayeli translated slowly. "My grandfather says the mistake can be undone, but only through judgment. He does not believe you meant harm, but honor was stirred, and once stirred, it must be satisfied." Silas straightened. "What does that mean?" "You must choose, accept the path you've begun, stand before them as husband, or reject it. If you refuse, they will restore our honor by blood." Silas stared at her. "That's not a choice." "It is the only one you are given." Kosati stepped forward. His voice, when it came, was thick with accent, but crystal clear in threat. "You stole what is mine. If you do not leave, I will make the ground red with your regret." Silas looked at Nayeli. Her eyes didn't plead, they didn't beg, but they asked, And that was harder to take. "I never meant to start this," Silas muttered, "but if I leave now, someone dies anyway." He turned toward Thornhawk. "There has to be another way," he said. The elder tilted his head slightly, then spoke one word in Apache. Nayeli smiled faintly. "He says, you may face the trials." The council fire had burned low. Embers glowed like dying stars in the dust, casting jagged shadows across the circle. Silas stood on one side, Kawasati stood on the other. Between them sat Thornhawk and the elders, unmoving as stone. To Silas it felt like standing between two gun barrels. Nayeli was nowhere in sight. The silver-haired elder woman from before, Imala, Nayeli's grandmother, stepped into the firelight. Her eyes bore through Silas, as if weighing not just his body, but his soul. She spoke sharply in Apache, voice rising and falling like thunder chasing wind. A few younger warriors muttered in agreement. Nayeli returned, walking slowly, face unreadable. She bowed to Imala before speaking. "She says you smell of whiskey and blood, that you come from a people who only take, that you wrapped me in your blanket not out of love, but guilt." Silas didn't flinch. He'd heard worse, much worse. "But she also says," Nayeli added, "if you truly believe you did not claim me, you should walk away now and face no further shame." Silas looked toward the shadows where Kawasati stood, arms folded, knife glinting on his belt. "You think he'll just let me walk?" he said quietly. "No," Nayeli answered. "But if you walk now, and I marry him, no blood will be spilled. He regains his honor. My family saves face. My pain is not part of the equation." Silas clenched his jaw. "That's quite a deal," he muttered, "except for you." Nayeli didn't argue. She didn't need to. Kawasati stepped forward. The movement rippled through the circle like a thrown stone. His voice was low but sharp. "He says," Nayeli translated, "this is not about her anymore. It is about you. About whether a man of your people can understand consequence." Silas looked around the fire, at the children watching from the shadows, at the warriors clutching their spears just a little tighter, at Imala, arms crossed, still judging, and at Thornhawk, silent as ever. "What happens if I stay?" Silas asked. Nayeli's answer was soft. "You must prove you are not a thief, that you didn't take what was not yours and flee, that you are worthy." He scoffed. "By whose measure?" "By ours." A silence fell. Then Thornhawk stood. His robe shimmered in the firelight as he raised a carved staff above his head. He spoke with gravity. When he finished, even Kawasati lowered his gaze. Nayeli stepped forward again, translating with calm authority. "He offers you the path of honor, the 3 trials." Silas blinked. "Trials?" "Tests our people have used for generations," she said, "to prove commitment, to restore balance, or to cast out the unworthy." "Let me guess," he muttered, "they're not easy." Nayeli shook her head. "Trial of strength, trial of wisdom, trial of sacrifice." He glanced at Kawasati, who stood rigid, brimming with resentment. "If I fail?" Silas asked. "You leave," she said, "but not alone. You will be marked as a man who betrayed honor, and I will carry that shame forever." "And Kawasati?" "He will be free to reclaim what was promised." Silas rubbed his face. His body still ached from the snow. His hand was raw from riding. He hadn't slept properly in 3 days. But he wasn't thinking about that. He was thinking about her, about the girl shivering beneath a boulder, about the eyes that didn't beg but asked, about the way she whispered his name like it mattered. He looked up. "All right," he said, "I'll do it." The crowd stirred. Kosati snarled something in Apache, sharp, guttural. Nayeli didn't translate. Instead, Imala stepped forward once more, this time holding something in her hands. A length of cloth, deerskin, embroidered with silver thread. She draped it over Nayeli's shoulders, over the blanket. It was a sign. She would wait. Her fate now tied to the outcome. Silas exhaled slowly, already feeling the weight of what he'd agreed to. He had crossed a line. And there was no crossing back. The sun dipped below the canyon rim, and the shadows stretched long and blue across the village. A wind picked up, not the cutting kind from the north, but warmer, whispering through the pines like voices too old to remember. The people gathered without needing to be called. They knew. The air had changed. Silas stood at the edge of the central fire pit, boots in the dust, eyes fixed on the rising flames. Around him, the entire village formed a circle, men, women, children, elders. Some curious, some skeptical, some still visibly angry. He felt them all pressing in without touching him. 3 objects had been placed in front of the fire: a coil of thick, weather-worn rope, a stone slab covered in carvings too ancient for his eye, and a small leather pouch that clinked softly whenever it moved. Nayeli stood beside him, silent but steady. She wore both the ceremonial deerskin shawl her grandmother had draped over her and the blanket he had given her. The two overlapped on her shoulders like past and future trying to make peace. Thornhawk stepped forward. He didn't raise his staff. He didn't shout. His voice didn't need to. He spoke to the circle, not to Silas alone, but to the whole village. His words were slow, rhythmic, like water dripping into stone. Measured. Nayeli translated in hushed tones. He says, "The man has chosen the trials, that we will judge him not as a stranger, but as one who dares to be seen." Silas swallowed. The elder gestured to the rope. "The first trial," Nayeli continued, "is strength. You must climb the cliff of the Thunderhawk. No tools, no help, just rope and will. At the top is the nest of the eagle. Bring back a feather." He looked toward the cliff wall to the east. It loomed in shadow now, jagged and unforgiving. The nest was barely visible, high up on a narrow ledge. He says, "Many have tried. Some have fallen." Thornhawk moved to the second item, the stone slab. Nayeli's voice dropped lower, reverent. "The second trial is wisdom. This is the ancestor stone. It holds the riddle of our people. You must interpret it before the fire burns to embers." Silas raised an eyebrow. "And what if I don't read Apache?" Nayeli met his eyes. "Wisdom is not knowing symbols. It's knowing what they mean." He didn't like the sound of that, but he liked the third item even less. Thornhawk picked up the leather pouch and let the contents shift audibly. Bones. "The final trial," she said, "is sacrifice. You will cast bones, and they will name what you must give up. If you cannot, you fail." Silas looked at her. "Give up what?" "What you value most." A boy whispered something from the crowd. An elder hushed him. Another child asked a question. Silas couldn't hear the words, but he could feel the question hanging in the air. Can a white man carry the fire without burning everything down? Then came Imala. She stepped forward without fanfare, carrying a long strip of cloth dyed the deep red of desert earth. As she moved, people parted to let her through, not out of fear, but respect. She tied the cloth around Silas's left wrist and nodded once. "She says," Nayeli whispered, "this marks you as a seeker. You are protected while you are in trial. But the mark is also a promise. If you try to leave before it ends, you break your word and break our law." Silas looked around the circle again.
At Kosati, arms crossed, eyes narrowed like a man already imagining victory. At Imala, proud and skeptical. At the cliff, still waiting. And finally, at Nayeli. "You're not afraid?" he asked. She shook her head once. "I've already made my choice." He exhaled slowly. "So have I." The flames behind him rose, casting his shadow tall and thin against the sacred stone. Somewhere in the village, a drum began to beat. Not fast, not loud, just steady. The cliff was older than memory, weathered by centuries of sun and wind, a jagged slab of sandstone rising out of the valley like a broken tooth.
In the last light of day, it glowed rust red, streaked with gold. From the village floor, the eagle's nest was barely visible, a black smudge near the top ledge, 70 feet up. Silas stared at it, jaw tight. Kawasati stood nearby, arms crossed. "You will fall," he said in English, the words thick with contempt. "Your soft hands are made for whiskey, not stone." Silas didn't reply. He didn't need to. Nayeli stepped forward with the rope, coiled over her arms. She didn't speak either, just handed it to him with both hands. He took it, feeling the roughness of the hemp. His palms were already raw from days of riding. Climbing with them would draw blood, no doubt. Around them, the village had gathered in a semicircle at the cliff's base. Some watched with morbid anticipation, others with a flicker of hope. A few children whispered predictions, hushed by their elders. Thornhawk raised his staff. The wind stilled. Nayeli turned to Silas. "You must return with a feather, not just touch the nest, not just climb. The eagle must acknowledge you." "Right," he muttered. "Make peace with the angry bird while hanging off a cliff. Simple enough." She almost smiled. Almost. He took a deep breath, tied the rope around his waist, and looped it over his shoulder. Then he stepped to the base of the cliff and looked up. The rock was cold, the shadows deeper than he expected. His heart thudded once, hard and slow. Then he began to climb. The first 20 feet went easier than expected. Years of ranch work had built strength into his shoulders and arms, sturdy muscle from mending fences, breaking horses, hauling water. But climbing was different. Climbing pulled from your soul, not your biceps. Halfway up, the wind kicked harder. The rope snapped against the stone. His boots slipped once, skidding across a patch of ice. The whole village gasped below. Silas didn't look down. He grunted, gripped higher, found another handhold. At 40 feet, his fingers began to split open. At 50, his legs were shaking. At 60, he reached a shelf, just wide enough to rest one boot. He paused there, chest heaving, shoulders screaming. Above him, the eagle's nest jutted out like a crown of thorns. Branches, bones, and feathers woven into a home against death. He reached again, just a few feet more. That's when the eagle appeared. It burst from the nest like a shot, golden wings flaring, eyes burning. A sound tore from its beak that pierced his ears worse than any bullet he'd heard in war. Silas threw up his arm, shielding his face. The eagle slashed across his shoulder with a hooked talon, ripping open his shirt and slicing skin. He gritted his teeth, grabbed the rock with one hand, and did not fall. The bird circled once, screaming, then soared off into the sky. Below, the village was deathly silent. Silas reached into the nest with a trembling hand. Carefully, deliberately, he plucked a single long feather, striped black and gold, the size of his forearm. Then, hand by bloodied hand, he began the descent. By the time his boots touched earth, he was shaking from head to toe. His left hand was torn. His shirt stuck to his shoulder with blood. He dropped to one knee and planted the feather into the dust like a banner. Nobody moved. Then, slowly, Thornhawk approached. He bent down, took the feather, and inspected it like it was a sacred text. He nodded.
Nayeli stepped beside him, her eyes wide, part disbelief, part something deeper, something wordless. Thornhawk raised the feather high. "The eagle fought you," Nayeli translated softly, "but you did not fight back. You endured." Thornhawk scoffed but said nothing. Silas pushed himself to his feet. "One down," he rasped, "two to go." The drums began again, steady, slow, and deeper than before. The eagle feather still trembled in Thornhawk's hand when Imala approached with the second object.
She carried it like it weighed more than it should, a flat stone slab the size of a saddle, carved with symbols that looked older than the mountain behind them. Spirals, animals, sun shapes, jagged lines like lightning. Some were worn so smooth they could barely be seen. Others were freshly darkened with soot or pigment. Imala set the stone down before Silas, then took a single step back. Thornhawk gestured toward the fire. Its flames were already beginning to shrink. Nayeli stood beside Silas again, voice calm but strained. "You must speak the truth of the ancestor stone before the fire burns to ash. The trial begins now." Silas looked at the stone, then the fire, then back at the circle of villagers. "Is this one of those answer a riddle or get thrown off a cliff things?" he asked quietly. Nayeli didn't smile. "This is not about the cliff. This is about your heart." He exhaled through his nose. "That's even worse." He knelt in front of the stone, resting his torn hands on his knees. The symbols were confusing at first, too many to make sense. He saw an eagle etched near the top, a bear beside it, a snake curled into a spiral, a stick figure in the center with arms outstretched, surrounded by lines radiating like sunbeams. All around them were marks of weather and time. This wasn't some fresh puzzle set up for him. This was old, sacred. It had been used by others, maybe for generations. He heard the fire behind him crackle, sputtering slightly. The heat was shrinking. Ticking clock. He closed his eyes and tried to remember how he used to read the land back on his ranch. You didn't look at the tracks. You looked at the space between them. The story was always there, hiding. Opening his eyes again, he saw it differently. The spiral wasn't just a pattern, it was a seasonal wheel. 4 quadrants, each animal placed in a direction. Bear to the south, eagle to the east, snake to the west. The 4th quadrant was something different. It looked like a shelter or a blanket. His throat tightened. He ran his fingers gently over the symbol. It was shaped like a shallow bowl, almost a cupped hand. It reminded him of that night, when he saw Nayeli curled in the snow, barely breathing. How he didn't think, didn't hesitate, just acted, covered her, shared warmth. He looked up. The symbols weren't just animals, they were choices. The bear, power, dominance, taking what you need. The eagle, freedom, escape, soaring above others' problems. The snake, transformation, yes, but also shedding, slithering away when things got hard. And the last, the blanket, the act of giving warmth when it cost you something. It wasn't a riddle, it was a mirror. Silas stood slowly. The fire was now a low bed of embers. He turned to face the circle. "I don't know your language," he said loudly, his voice rough. "I don't know your gods, or your myths, or your trials, but I know this." He pointed to the stone. "That's not a bear. That's not a snake. That's not even a bird. Those are ways to live." He pointed to the shelter. "That one, that's the one I chose. I gave what I had, even if it was foolish, even if I didn't understand what it meant." He looked at Nayeli. "And I'd do it again." Silence fell. Then Thornhawk nodded once. Nayeli translated, her voice unsteady. "He says, you have seen the truth. That wisdom isn't knowing our words. It's knowing your own story and speaking it plainly.
Silas let out a long breath. Then he looked at the third object waiting beside the fire, the leather pouch, the trial of sacrifice. The fire had fallen to glowing coals, no flames, no heat licking skyward, just a bed of orange light that pulsed low and angry, like the last breath of something ancient. Silas stood frozen, eyes locked on the third object, the leather pouch. It lay coiled in the dust, the bones inside whispering faint clicks whenever the wind shifted. Nayeli's voice came soft.
No one but Thorn Hawk knows what the bones will demand, not even him, until they fall. Silas swallowed hard. He didn't ask what the worst outcome might be. Somehow he already knew it wouldn't be something as simple as blood or pain, not this time. Kosati broke the silence. He stepped forward, his boots grinding the dust, hands clenched tight. "This trial is a lie," he snapped, switching from Apache to English so everyone, especially Silas, could hear. "He is a white man. He does not belong. He has not suffered what we have. His sacrifice is a performance." A ripple moved through the crowd. Tension rose like heat off canyon stone. Silas didn't flinch. "Say what you need to say." "I already did," Kosati spat. "You show up with your horse, your blanket, your bleeding hands, thinking that earns trust. But you don't live here. You don't speak our tongue. You gave her a blanket, but it's still our people burying children. Still our land soaked with blood." He turned to Thornhawk, voice rising. "Why should his trials mean anything? Let me challenge him. Let us finish this with truth." Imala's staff hit the ground once, hard. Everyone froze. Even Thornhawk looked to her. The old woman stepped forward slowly, one hand raised like she was parting waves. Her face was stone, but her voice was thunder, quiet and heavy. She spoke in Apache, her words falling like verdicts. Nayeli translated low. She says, "No man can finish the fire without passing through sacrifice. And if one challenges it, then both must face it, side by side. No escape." A murmur ran through the people. Kosati stared at her, then at the pouch. His bravado wavered. Still, he nodded. So be it. Thornhawk moved between them. He lifted the pouch, shook it once, and held it to the sky. Then he let the bones fall. They landed with a sound that didn't belong to this world. Dry, brittle, final. Silas looked down. There were 3 of them. One carved with a symbol that looked like a flame, one like a bird in flight, and the third, a simple open palm. Nayeli dropped to one knee to inspect them, then stood slowly. Her voice cracked. "The fire means courage, the bird means spirit, but the palm?" She looked at Silas. "It means surrender, not of life, but of what you cling to most." Silas felt his chest tighten. "What does that mean?" he asked. "What do I have to give up?" Thornhawk stepped forward. He looked at Kosati first. "You," Nayeli translated, "must give up your place in the war circle, the right to lead vengeance. You must abandon hatred as your path." Kosati's eyes flared. "That is my birthright." Thornhawk turned to Silas. "You," Nayeli continued, barely whispering now, "must give up your horse." Silas froze. The silence was a blow, not because of the sacrifice itself, but because of what it meant. That horse, Jasper, wasn't just a mount. He was everything left of Silas's old life. The one who'd carried him across the desert, who'd stayed through storms, raids, and silence, who never asked, only endured. It was the only friend he had left in this world. He looked at the bones again. Palm open. Surrender. Kosati stepped back, breathing hard. "I won't," he muttered. "I won't lay down my blood for a white man's game."
Thornhawk said nothing, but Imala turned her back on him, and so did the fire. The wind picked up, not with force, but with sound. It whispered through the trees like voices of the dead, brushing against the eagle feather tied in Silas's hair, making it dance like it still remembered the sky. He stood alone now. Kosati had stepped away, his back turned not just to Silas, but to the entire trial. Whatever fire had burned in him had dimmed, replaced by something colder. Pride, perhaps, or shame. Silas didn't watch him go. His eyes were on Jasper. The horse was tethered near the edge of the clearing, head low, mane tangled with dust. He looked calm.
Trusting, oblivious to what had just been asked, Silas took a step toward him, then another. Each one felt heavier than the last. He remembered the winter 2 years ago, when the storm had trapped them in a canyon for 3 nights. He and Jasper huddled beneath a rock ledge, no fire, no food. The horse had leaned into him, steady and silent, like a mountain with a heartbeat. He remembered the ride across the San Pedro Basin, when bandits chased them for 20 miles, and Jasper never faltered. He remembered the silence after losing his wife, when Jasper didn't leave, didn't judge, just waited. He reached the animal now and pressed his forehead to the side of its neck. The warmth of the horse seeped into him, and his throat closed. "You were the last piece," he whispered, "the only thing that never let go." Jasper snorted gently, brushing his nose against Silas's torn shirt. Silas stepped back and untied the reins. He turned, leading the horse back toward the fire circle. Gasps rippled through the crowd as they realized what he was doing. Imala said nothing, but her face softened. Thornhawk nodded once, as if this was how it had always been written. Nayeli stood beside the embers. Her eyes were wet but steady. "Are you sure?" she asked. Silas looked down at the bones in the dirt. The palm was still facing upward. "I came here with nothing but this horse and a heart I didn't think I'd ever open again." He looked up at her. "You gave me back both." She didn't speak, but her silence was thunder. Silas untied the saddlebag from Jasper's flank and placed it in the dust. Then he handed the reins to Imala. "For the tribe," he said, "for the girl who made me remember what it means to live." Imala took the reins. Then she leaned close and whispered something into the horse's ear. Jasper didn't move, just blinked slowly, as if already understanding. Thornhawk stepped into the circle. He raised his hand, then pointed it toward the mountains. "Let him go," Nayeli translated. "Let the spirit of the past walk free." Imala gave the horse a gentle tap. Jasper turned, walking into the dusk. Not tethered, not forced, just walking, one step at a time, until the shadows swallowed him whole. Silas stood, chest heaving, empty, and somehow whole. Behind him, the fire sparked again. One tiny flicker, then 2. A sudden gust sent embers spiraling upward, dancing into the sky like stars set loose. Thornhawk looked at Silas and spoke one final phrase. Nayeli translated, "Now the fire accepts you." The fire, once nearly dead, now roared back to life. It wasn't natural, not just a gust of wind or dry kindling. It felt summoned, ignited by something older than flint or spark. The flames danced high, reflecting in every pair of eyes around the circle. Even Kosati, standing at the edge of the gathering, turned toward it. Then came the sound. Boots. Not moccasins, not hoofbeats, but steel-toed boots and the harsh jingle of saddle gear. From the north ridge, just beyond the line of cedar, 5 silhouettes emerged, dark against the moonlit brush. Men, white men, armed and ready. Silas's breath caught. The leader, McGrady, grease-streaked hat, gut heavy with whiskey and violence. He stopped just beyond the light of the fire, eyes glinting with casual menace.
"Well, hell," he called out. "Looks like I wandered into a bonfire and forgot my marshmallows." The men behind him laughed. Thornhawk didn't move. Neither did Imala. But Silas stepped forward, heart pounding. "You've got no claim here," he said, voice loud enough for the entire tribe to hear. McGrady smirked. "Don't I? That girl you dragged off the trail, she's property now, tagged and paid for." Nayeli flinched. So did the warriors nearest her. Kosati clenched his fists. "You speak like the old slavers," he growled. "I speak like a man who knows what he bought." McGrady pointed a pistol at the ground. "Give her back, cowboy,
before things get smoky." Silas looked at the circle, looked at Nayeli, at Thornhawk, at the fire that now crackled beside him. He stepped toward McGrady, just one step, and spread his arms wide. "She's not yours," he said calmly. "Not anymore. Maybe never was." McGrady raised the pistol. "You think because you passed their little fire dance that makes you king of the rocks?" Silas didn't answer. Behind him, Imala stepped forward. Then Thornhawk, then Kosati. One by one, the tribe formed a wall of silent resistance behind Silas. Not one spoke. Not one moved to attack. But their unity was louder than any war cry. McGrady hesitated. Something in his eyes flickered. Doubt? Fear, maybe? Not of guns, but of meaning. Because even a man like him could tell. This wasn't a game anymore. He spat in the dirt. "This ain't over." He holstered the pistol and turned, motioning his men back. They vanished into the dark. When silence returned, it was deeper than before. Sacred, earned. Silas turned back to the circle. Thornhawk stepped forward. He took the last of the glowing embers and crushed them between his palms. Then he placed the soot on Silas's forehead. 3 black lines. One for the trial of the body. One for the trial of the mind. One for the trial of the soul. Nayeli whispered, "It's done." Imala raised her staff and cried out in Apache, just once. The crowd echoed back, a unified sound that shook the dust off trees and sent birds from the canyons. A new voice answered from the shadows, a girl's voice, small but steady, Nayeli's. She stepped beside Silas and reached for his hand. Then she said in English for all to hear, "This man is not my owner. He is not my rescuer. He is my kin." The fire was gone. Only coals remained, dim, quiet, like memories too tired to burn. Silas sat alone near the edge of the circle, his back against a weathered juniper, blanket wrapped around his shoulders. Not the same blanket he had given Nayeli, but a new one, handmade, stitched by the hands of those who had once doubted him. In the silence, he missed the sound of hoofbeats. Jasper's absence was louder than any voice. Footsteps approached. Kosati. He didn't speak right away, just stood there, arms crossed, eyes fixed on the dying embers. Then, wordlessly, he drew a sheathed knife from his belt. Short, curved, the handle wrapped in old sinew, and placed it in the dirt beside Silas. "My father carried it in war," he said. Silas looked up, surprised. "I carry it no more," Kosati added, then turned and walked away. No apology, no embrace. But it was enough. A moment later, Imala appeared. She didn't speak either. Instead, she handed him a small leather pouch. Inside, he found 3 things: a single eagle feather, a sprig of dried mesquite, and a round polished stone, warm from her hand. "Symbols," Nayeli said gently, kneeling beside him. "Feather for truth, mesquite for endurance, stone for memory." She paused, then looked him in the eye. "You gave a blanket, but you gave more than that." He smiled, a quiet, grateful smile. Something settled in his chest, something steady. No longer rage, no longer grief, just place. Belonging.
As the stars wheeled overhead, Silas lay back, staring at the dark dome of sky. He didn't need answers, didn't need redemption. He had something rarer. He had peace. 6 months passed. The seasons turned, as they always do, but the land felt different now, less like a battleground, more like a waiting place. Silas stayed, not because he had nowhere else to go, but because, for the first time in years, somewhere had chosen him back. They built a new shelter near the stream, a low, wide building with an open front and smoke-hole ceiling. Part trading post, part neutral ground. Apache, Mexican, Anglo, all were welcome, so long as they came unarmed and left their grudges at the edge of the trees. They called it the Circle.
Nayeli helped paint its stones. Her laughter, rare, small, could sometimes be heard floating over the mesquite in early morning when she taught Silas new Apache words by pointing and teasing him when he got them wrong. He taught her how to calm a skittish horse, how to clean a rifle, how to tell real thunder from echoes in the canyons. One day, McGrady came back, alone. No pistol, no sneer, just a horse trailing a small bundle, a child half-starved, covered in desert dust. He didn't speak, didn't look Silas in the eye, just handed over the reins and rode off again. The boy stayed. No one asked questions. Kosati returned too from time to time, bringing young warriors to trade or to listen. Once he said softly to Imala, "The white man teaches without shame. That has power." At the center of the circle, they placed a ring of stone, 12 rocks, each marked with a burnt symbol from that night, the fire, the hand, the horse. No names, no stories, just memory, etched in heat and silence. And every week, before the sun dipped, Nayeli would walk the circle with others, touching each stone once, whispering something Silas didn't understand. But somehow he always felt it. They called her Firewalker, the girl who walked through the cold and carried flame in her chest. Not because she survived, but because she helped others survive. Nayeli's story spread to ranches, to trading posts, even whispered through saloons where cowhands argued about Apache ghosts and magic blankets. But those who had stood in the circle knew better. It wasn't magic, it was warmth. And warmth, true warmth, changes everything. Silas never left the circle. He aged, quietly, became a man with fewer words, but more listeners. Children gathered at his feet on winter nights, their cheeks red with cold, waiting for the old man to speak. He told them stories, not of battles, but of kindness, of a girl who once trusted a stranger with nothing but her silence. And every time he ended the same way. "She saved me more than I ever saved her." Then one spring, a new traveler arrived, a boy no older than Nayeli had been, lost, hungry, afraid. Silas didn't ask where he came from. He simply rose, walked inside the hut, and returned with a hand-woven blanket. He wrapped it around the boy's shoulders. "You'll be all right," he said. The boy looked up, eyes full of questions, and Silas smiled. "I once gave a blanket," he whispered, "and it lit the fire that saved a life." Some say Silas left no blood heirs, but those who knew him disagreed, because kindness leaves its own lineage. And somewhere, out past the cactus line, when the wind shifts just right, you can still hear hooves and fire crackling and a girl's voice saying, "This man is not my owner. He is not my rescuer. He is my kin." Thank you for riding with us through this story. If something in it stirred you, made you remember, reflect, or simply feel, we'd love to hear it. Drop your thoughts in the comments. Your voice keeps these flames alive. And if you believe the world still needs stories like this, of quiet courage, simple kindness, and unexpected redemption, then hit that subscribe button and join us on the trail. Because this isn't the end. It's just one of many true Wild West stories still waiting to be told.